You're 32 and still don't have a real career, Maya. When are you going to stop playing dress up and get a serious job? My mother's voice cut through the Christmas dinner like a blade, her perfectly manicured fingers gesturing dismissively toward my simple black sweater. The entire dining room fell silent except for the soft clink of crystal glasses and the muffled laughter from my sister's children playing in the next room. My father set down his wine glass with deliberate precision, the kind of movement that meant he was about to deliver one of his lectures. Your sister Jennifer has built an entire marketing empire by your age. She owns 3 offices, drives a Mercedes, and just bought that beautiful house in Malibu. Meanwhile, you're still living in that tiny apartment, wearing clothes from Target. His eyes swept over me with the same disappointment I'd seen countless times before, the look that said I was the family's greatest mystery and biggest letdown. Jennifer, my golden child sister, smoothed her designer dress and offered me one of her practiced sympathetic smiles. Maya, I know you've been trying different things, but maybe it's time to think practically. I could get you an entry level position at my company. Nothing glamorous, but it pays well and has benefits. You could finally start building something real. The condescension dripped from her voice like honey, sweet on the surface but bitter underneath. My brother in law Marcus chimed in with a chuckle. Come on, Jen. Maybe Maya just isn't cut out for the corporate world. Some people are better suited for simpler things. He raised his glass in a mock toast, and the adults around the table laughed softly, the kind of polite laughter that accompanies uncomfortable truth spoken aloud. I sat there at the end of the mahogany table, surrounded by family members who saw me as their collective disappointment, their cautionary tale, their proof that not everyone in the Martinez family was destined for greatness. The chandelier above cast warm light over their confident faces, illuminating their satisfaction at having once again put me in my place. They had no idea that the woman they pitied, the one they saw as directionless and unsuccessful, had spent the last 12 years becoming something they couldn't even imagine. They didn't know that while they slept safely in their beds, I had crawled through mud under machine gun fire and training exercises so realistic that some candidates broke down crying. They didn't know that I had learned to navigate by stars alone, to survive on 3 hours of sleep for weeks, to make life or death decisions in split seconds while explosions shook the ground beneath my feet. They had no clue that their failure daughter had mastered skills most people only saw in movies. As they continued their familiar chorus of disappointment, I remained silent. Not because I couldn't defend myself, but because I had learned something they would never understand. True strength doesn't announce itself, it simply exists. For years, I had endured their judgment, their suggestions, their barely concealed embarrassment when friends asked what their other daughter did for work. I had perfected the art of vague responses and subject changes, protecting not just classified information, but protecting them from a truth they weren't ready to handle. The irony was exquisite. They criticized my simple lifestyle while I earned more in a year than most of them combined. They worried about my lack of a real career, while I held one of the most respected positions in the military. They questioned my life choices while I had dedicated my existence to protecting theirs. But tonight, as I watched them pass judgment with their usual mixture of pity and superiority, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry exactly. Anger was too simple, too reactive for what I felt. Instead, there was a calm certainty settling over me like armor I'd worn countless times before. For more than a decade, I had honored my commitment to operational security, keeping my family safely ignorant of the dangerous world I navigated daily. I had protected them from worry, from fear, from the knowledge that their daughter regularly put herself in harm's way in service of something bigger than their suburban understanding of success. But protection and silence weren't the same thing as acceptance. I didn't owe them my continued submission to their narrow definition of achievement. I had spent years allowing them to see me as less than I was. And for what? To spare their feelings? To maintain family harmony? To avoid uncomfortable conversations about a life they couldn't comprehend? My mother was still talking, something about Jennifer's latest business acquisition and how proud she was to have at least one daughter who understood ambition. My father nodded along, occasionally glancing at me with that familiar expression of paternal disappointment, mixed with resigned acceptance. They had given up expecting greatness from me long ago, settling instead for hoping I would at least achieve adequacy. What they couldn't see, sitting there in their comfortable dining room with their conventional measures of success, was that I had already achieved something far beyond their understanding. While Jennifer built her marketing empire, I had helped build democracy in countries most Americans couldn't locate on a map. While she accumulated possessions and profit margins, I had accumulated experiences that would sound like fiction if I were allowed to share them. The skills I had mastered weren't listed on any resume they would recognize. I could breach a building in complete darkness, extract valuable intelligence from hostile environments, and lead teams through impossible missions where failure meant death. I spoke three languages fluently and could navigate complex political situations that made corporate boardroom politics look like playground disagreements. My simple apartment was actually a carefully chosen location with multiple escape routes and security features they would never notice. But tonight, as their familiar chorus of disappointment washed over me, I realized something profound. I was tired of protecting them from the truth. Not because I wanted to hurt them or prove them wrong, but because I was finally ready to stop carrying the weight of their misconceptions. Their approval had once meant everything to me, but somewhere along the way, I'd found something more valuable than their validation. I had found myself. The woman sitting at their table wasn't the failure they saw. She was a warrior, a leader, a guardian of freedoms they took for granted. She had earned the respect of some of the most dangerous and capable people on Earth, had been trusted with missions that could change the course of history, and had proven herself in ways they couldn't imagine. And tomorrow, that reality would collide with their comfortable assumptions in a way none of us would forget. They thought they knew who I was, but they had no idea who I had become. The quiet daughter, the disappointing sister, the family member who never quite measured up, she was about to show them exactly what real strength looked like. And it all started with this moment, this dinner, this decision to stop hiding behind their low expectations and start living in the truth of what I had accomplished. The laughter continued around me, but I was no longer listening. Instead, I was remembering tomorrow's ceremony, the one they insisted on attending, despite having no idea what they were about to witness. Jennifer had begged me to let them come to my work thing, as she called it, probably hoping to finally see what I did all day so she could offer more helpful career advice. They were about to get their answer, but not in any way they expected. The woman they pitied was about to receive one of the highest honors her country could bestow, surrounded by the kind of people who truly understood what sacrifice and service meant. And when that moment came, when the truth finally emerged from the shadows where I had kept it hidden for their sake, everything would change. But for now, I simply smiled and stayed silent, because tomorrow would speak louder than any words I could offer tonight. The humiliation wasn't new, but tonight it felt sharper, more deliberate. As my mother continued her monologue about Jennifer's latest success story, I found myself studying the faces around the table with the analytical precision I'd learned in reconnaissance training. Every micro expression, every subtle gesture, every carefully chosen word, they all painted the same picture of a family that had collectively decided I was their disappointment. My Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. Maya, sweetheart, we're all just worried about you. You're getting older, and we haven't seen any signs of, well, progress. No boyfriend, no career advancement, no investments or property. Don't you want the things Jennifer has? She gestured toward my sister, who was showing off her new diamond tennis bracelet to my cousins, the stones catching the light like tiny stars on her wrist. The irony was so thick I could taste it. If they only knew that I owned more real estate than Jennifer, not through inheritance or business loans, but through combat pay and hazard duty compensation accumulated over years of deployments they knew nothing about. My tiny apartment was indeed small, but it was one of four properties I owned across different states, chosen specifically for their strategic locations and security features. My cousin Derek, fresh out of his MBA program and still riding high on his first corporate job, decided to join the conversation. You know, Maya, there are some great opportunities in tech right now. I could introduce you to some recruiters. The entry level positions don't pay much, but if you work hard, you could maybe reach middle management in 5 or 6 years. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had never faced real adversity, whose biggest challenge was choosing between two job offers. I almost laughed out loud. Middle management. If only he knew that I had been leading teams of highly trained operatives through missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth since before he'd graduated college. The entry level experience he was offering me paled in comparison to the leadership challenges I faced regularly, where a single wrong decision could cost lives and compromise national security. Jennifer set down her wine glass and looked at me with what she probably thought was sisterly compassion. Maya, I've been thinking. Maybe your problem is that you're too comfortable being, well, average. You've never really pushed yourself or taken risks. Success requires ambition, and I'm not sure you've ever really had that drive. She paused, letting her words sink in like she was delivering profound wisdom. Some people are just content with less, and maybe that's okay for you. Content with less. The phrase echoed in my mind as I thought about the risks I'd taken that would turn her hair white if she knew about them. Parachuting into hostile territory at night, navigating through minefields, conducting operations where capture meant torture and death. Apparently, none of that qualified as taking risks in Jennifer's corporate universe. My father cleared his throat, preparing to deliver what I knew would be another lecture about responsibility and planning for the future. Your mother and I have been discussing this, Maya. We think it might be time for some tough love. You can't just drift through life hoping things will work out. You need goals, structure, a 5 year plan. Look at Jennifer. She knew exactly what she wanted and went after it aggressively. Right? Structure, goals, a 5 year plan. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from responding. My life was more structured than a Swiss watch, governed by classified schedules and operational timelines they couldn't begin to comprehend. My goals were measured not in profit margins or market share, but in successfully completed missions and lives saved. My 5 year plan was classified at levels that required security clearances most people would never qualify for. My mother nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And we're not getting any younger, Maya. We won't be around forever to help you figure things out. What happens when we're gone and you're still living paycheck to paycheck in that little apartment? Her voice carried the weight of maternal disappointment, mixed with genuine fear for my future, as if I were some helpless creature who couldn't survive without their guidance. Paycheck to paycheck. The assumption stung, not because it was insulting, but because it revealed how completely they had missed the mark. My financial situation was more secure than anyone else's at that table, built not on inherited wealth or business success, but on hazard pay, combat bonuses, and the kind of compensation that came with willingly placing yourself in harm's way for your country. The conversation continued swirling around me like water around a stone. They discussed my future as if I weren't sitting right there, debating whether I was simply lazy, unmotivated, or lacking in natural ability. My brother in law suggested I might benefit from therapy to address my fear of success. My aunt wondered aloud if I had ever been properly tested for learning disabilities. My cousin offered to review my resume and help me identify my transferable skills. Each suggestion was delivered with genuine concern, which somehow made it worse than outright cruelty would have been. They truly believed they were helping, that their intervention was necessary to save me from a life of mediocrity and failure. They couldn't see that the life they were trying to rescue me from was actually a carefully constructed cover, a necessary deception that protected both operational security and their own peace of mind. As the dinner plates were cleared and dessert was served, the conversation shifted to Jennifer's upcoming business expansion. She had secured funding for 2 new offices and was hiring additional staff. The family hung on every word of her success story, asking detailed questions about her strategy, her timeline, her projected growth. Their faces glowed with pride and vicarious achievement. I watched this display of familial celebration and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me was genuinely happy for Jennifer's success. She had worked hard and deserved recognition. But another part of me ached with the realization that they would never look at me with that same pride. would never celebrate my achievements with that same enthusiasm because they would never know what I had actually accomplished. The dessert course brought more stories of Jennifer's triumphs and more gentle suggestions for my improvement. My mother mentioned a neighbor's daughter who had turned her life around by going back to school for nursing. My father suggested I consider government work because it offered good benefits and job security. The irony of that particular suggestion was almost overwhelming. Government work. If only they knew that I had been serving their government with distinction for over a decade, that I held security clearances that took years to obtain, that I had sacrificed more for public service than most people could imagine. Their assumption that I needed to find my way into government work, as if it were some sort of safety net for the professionally unsuccessful, revealed just how little they understood about the world beyond their comfortable suburban existence. By the time coffee was served, I had heard detailed analyses of my failings, comprehensive suggestions for my improvement, and multiple offers of assistance in finding a real career. Not once had anyone asked what I actually did for work, what my goals were, or whether I was happy with my life. They had constructed their own narrative about my failure and were determined to stick to it, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. The evening was winding down, but their concern for my future showed no signs of diminishing. They scheduled follow up conversations, promised to send me job listings, and offered to make introductions to their professional contacts. Each gesture was motivated by love, but felt like another weight added to the burden of their misconceptions. As I prepared to leave, I realized that tomorrow's ceremony would change everything. The careful balance I had maintained between operational security and family harmony was about to be shattered. They were about to discover that their greatest disappointment was actually their greatest success story, hidden in plain sight for more than a decade. But tonight, I was still their failure, their cautionary tale, their reminder that not everyone in the Martinez family was destined for greatness. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would reshape their understanding of success, strength, and sacrifice. Tonight, I simply gathered my coat and thanked them for dinner, carrying their disappointment with me into the cold night air. The drive home through the quiet suburban streets gave me time to process what had just happened at dinner. But more importantly, it gave me space to recognize the shift that had occurred inside me during those 2 hours of gentle humiliation. Something fundamental had changed between the moment I walked into my parents' house and the moment I walked out. The woman who had arrived still carried some small, stubborn hope that maybe this time would be different, that maybe they would finally see past their preconceptions. The woman driving home had released that hope entirely. I pulled into my apartment complex parking garage and sat in my car for several minutes, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The silence felt different now, not empty or lonely, but full of possibility. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I wasn't mentally rehearsing explanations or defenses. I wasn't crafting careful responses to anticipated criticisms. I wasn't strategizing ways to make myself more palatable to their expectations. Instead, I was remembering who I actually was. The revelation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was more like stepping out of a room I'd been in so long I'd forgotten there was a door. The constant background noise of seeking their approval, of trying to bridge the gap between their perception and my reality, simply stopped. Not with anger or resentment, but with a calm recognition that I had been playing a game where the rules were rigged against me from the start. Walking up to my apartment, I caught my reflection in the lobby mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me had the same face I'd worn to dinner, but something in her eyes was different. There was a stillness there that hadn't existed before, a kind of centered quiet that had nothing to do with submission and everything to do with power. Real power. Not the kind that demanded recognition, but the kind that simply existed, unshakable and self contained. Inside my apartment, I moved through my evening routine with unusual awareness. As I hung up the simple black sweater my mother had criticized, I thought about the conversations that sweater had witnessed. It had been with me during classified briefings where the fate of hostages hung in the balance. It had kept me warm during red-eye flights to deployment zones most civilians would never hear about. It had absorbed the salt from tears shed for teammates who didn't make it home. That simple sweater held more real history than Jennifer's entire wardrobe of designer statements. I made tea and settled into my reading chair, but instead of reaching for a book, I found myself staring out the window at the city lights below. Each point of light represented lives being lived, dreams being pursued, battles being fought that my family would never know about. Somewhere out there, other people were protecting things that mattered while their own families assumed they were failures or disappointments. The thought didn't make me feel sorry for myself. Instead, it filled me with a strange sense of belonging to something larger than suburban dinner table politics. I was part of a community of quiet guardians, people who measured success not in possessions or recognition, but in missions completed and lives protected. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation or validation from those we served. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Hope you're not upset about tonight. We really do want what's best for you. Think about what I said about the job opportunity, okay? Love you. The message was kindly meant, but reading it felt like receiving concern from someone speaking a foreign language. The gap between her understanding and my reality was so vast that bridging it seemed not just impossible, but unnecessary. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat with the message and noticed that it didn't trigger the usual mixture of frustration and guilt. I wasn't angry with Jennifer for not understanding. How could she understand something I had never been able to share? I wasn't hurt by her assumptions about my needs and capabilities. Those assumptions said nothing about me and everything about the limitations of the life she had lived. For the first time, I felt genuinely sorry for them, not in a condescending way, but with real compassion. They were trapped in such a narrow definition of success that they couldn't recognize strength when it sat at their dinner table. They were so focused on external markers of achievement that they were blind to the quiet dignity of service. They lived in a world where worth was measured by accumulation, completely missing the profound satisfaction that came from dedication to something greater than oneself. My silence tonight hadn't been a weakness or defeat. It had been a choice. For years, I had protected them from knowledge that would frighten them, decisions that would disturb their sleep, realities that would shatter their comfortable assumptions about how the world worked. My silence had been a gift, though they would never know it. But gifts, I realized, could be withdrawn, not out of spite or revenge, but simply because the giver had the right to stop giving. I had spent more than a decade shielding them from truths that might upset them, but what about the truth that might liberate me? What about honesty that might finally allow me to be seen as I actually was, rather than as their incomplete understanding of who I should be? Tomorrow's ceremony looms in my mind, but not with anxiety anymore. Instead, I felt a deep anticipation, like the moment before a mission when all the planning and preparation crystallized into action. They would attend because Jennifer had insisted they should finally see what I did for work. They expected some modest acknowledgement of mediocre service, probably assuming I worked in some administrative capacity that barely qualified as noteworthy. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would redefine their understanding of accomplishment itself. I opened my laptop and looked at the speech I had prepared for tomorrow's ceremony. The words on the screen represented years of experiences I had never been able to share, achievements that had been locked away in classified files and operational reports they would never read. Tomorrow, some of those achievements would finally see daylight. Not because I needed their recognition, but because the truth had its own power and deserved to be honored. The woman they pitied had spent the last 12 years becoming someone they couldn't imagine. She had earned respect in rooms where respect was measured in life and death consequences. She had made decisions that affected national security and international relations. She had led teams through impossible situations and brought them home safely. She had sacrificed comfort, relationships, and personal ambitions in service of ideals they took for granted. Tomorrow, that woman would finally step out of the shadows, not for them, but for herself. I closed the laptop and prepared for bed, but sleep felt secondary to the clarity that had settled over me. The shift was complete now. I no longer needed their approval because I had found something more valuable: my own respect, earned through trials they couldn't comprehend, forged in fires they would never face. The silence that had marked tonight's dinner would soon be broken, but not by explanations or justifications. It would be broken by revelation, by truth finally claiming its rightful place in the light. They thought they knew who I was, but tomorrow they would discover who I had become. And that discovery would change everything, not just for them, but for me. Because finally, after all these years of protecting their comfort at the expense of my own recognition, I was ready to let the truth speak for itself. The quiet woman they had dismissed was about to show them what real strength looked like. The pattern had been established long before I was old enough to understand what it meant. I was 7 when I first realized that Jennifer and I lived under different rules in the same house. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd spent hours building an elaborate fort in the living room, using every pillow, blanket, and chair I could find. The architecture was complex: multiple rooms, secret passages, even a drawbridge made from a cutting board balanced on books. When my parents came downstairs, my father looked at the construction with obvious annoyance. Maya, what is this mess? Clean it up right now. You can't just destroy the living room like this. But before I could respond, Jennifer appeared at the top of the stairs in her dance costume, ready for her recital rehearsal. The irritation on my father's face melted into pure adoration. There's my beautiful ballerina. Are you ready to dazzle everyone today? The fort was forgotten, dismissed as chaos that needed to be cleaned up, while Jennifer's twirls across the same living room were celebrated as artistry. I dismantled my creation in silence, folding blankets and stacking pillows while my parents fussed over Jennifer's hair ribbons and discussed plans for a celebration dinner after her performance. No one asked if I wanted to come watch her dance. No one suggested we celebrate my architectural achievement, however temporary it might have been. By age 10, I had learned to read the subtle signs that preceded disappointment. When I brought home a perfect math test, my mother would glance at it briefly and say, "That's nice, sweetheart," before returning to whatever she was doing. But when Jennifer brought home the same grade, it warranted phone calls to grandparents and a special dessert with dinner. I began to understand that my successes were expected, unremarkable, while Jennifer's identical achievements were miracles worthy of celebration. The summer I turned 12, I decided to learn guitar. I saved my allowance for months, bought a used acoustic from a garage sale, and taught myself to play using library books and whatever tutorials I could find online. By August, I could play several songs well enough to perform them. I practiced quietly in my room, mindful not to disturb anyone, dreaming of the day I would be confident enough to play for my family. That same summer, Jennifer expressed interest in piano lessons. Within a week, my parents had purchased a beautiful upright piano and enrolled her in classes with the best instructor in town. The piano was placed prominently in the living room, and her practice sessions became family entertainment. Relatives were invited over to hear her play simple scales and basic exercises. The same relatives who had never been invited to hear my guitar playing, though I could perform actual songs. When I finally worked up the courage to play for them, my father listened for about 30 seconds before saying, "That's lovely, Maya, but could you practice in your room? The guitar is a bit loud." Meanwhile, Jennifer's piano lessons were scheduled during family time, and we were all expected to gather around and appreciate her progress. High school brought new opportunities for invisible disappointment. I joined the debate team and discovered I had a natural talent for research and argumentation. I spent weekends preparing cases, studying opposing positions, and learning to think critically under pressure. My sophomore year, I won the regional championship, beating students from schools with much better funding and more prestigious programs. The day of the championship, my parents couldn't attend because Jennifer had a soccer game the same afternoon. When I came home with my trophy, they were still at Jennifer's game. I left the trophy on the kitchen counter and went to my room. Later that evening, my father glanced at it briefly and said, "Oh, that's great, honey. What exactly is the debate again?" Before I could explain, Jennifer burst through the door with news that her team had won their game, and the conversation immediately shifted to discussing her goals and assists. My trophy was moved to a shelf in my bedroom the next day to make room for Jennifer's soccer awards on the kitchen counter. The message was clear. Her athletic achievements were family achievements, worthy of public display and frequent mention. My intellectual accomplishments were personal hobbies, nice for me, but not particularly interesting to anyone else. College applications revealed the depth of their different expectations for us. Jennifer's college plans were a family project. My parents researched schools, visited campuses, hired a consultant to help with her essays, and discussed strategy over dinner every night for months. They worried about her chances, celebrated her acceptances, and proudly shared her full ride scholarship news with everyone they knew. My college planning happened in isolation. When I asked about visiting schools, my father said we couldn't afford multiple trips and suggested I look at state schools close to home. When I mentioned wanting to apply to the Naval Academy, my mother laughed and said, "Oh, Maya, be realistic. That's not for girls like you." The fact that I had already been in contact with a recruiter, had completed preliminary fitness assessments, and had researched the application process extensively wasn't worth discussing, apparently. I applied to the Naval Academy anyway, along with several other competitive programs, funding the application fees with money from my part time job at the local bookstore. When my acceptance letter arrived, I read it alone in my room, understanding that this achievement would somehow be minimized or explained away. Sure enough, when I shared the news at dinner, my father's first response was, "Are you sure that's what you want? It's going to be very difficult for you. Maybe you should consider the state school instead." Jennifer had been accepted to a prestigious business program that same week, and the contrast in their reactions was stark. Her acceptance was celebrated with a special dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. My acceptance to one of the most competitive institutions in the country was met with concern and subtle suggestions that I might be making a mistake. The summer before I left for the academy, I tried one last time to connect with them about my decision. I explained what the education would offer, the opportunities it would provide, the chance to serve something larger than myself. My mother nodded politely but seemed distracted. My father expressed worry about the physical demands and whether I was tough enough for military life. Meanwhile, Jennifer's pre college summer was filled with shopping trips for her dorm room, parties with friends who would be attending nearby schools, and constant family discussions about her future business empire. The differences in their investment were so obvious that even extended family members began to notice and comment quietly among themselves. The day I left for the Naval Academy, my parents drove me to the airport with the same energy they might have brought to a dental appointment. There were no tears, no proud photos, no last minute advice about making the most of the opportunity. Jennifer had left for college 2 weeks earlier with a send off that included a party, a photo session, and promises to visit often. As I boarded the plane that would take me toward a future they couldn't understand or appreciate, I realized that their indifference had given me an unexpected gift: complete freedom from their expectations. If they didn't believe in my potential, I was free to exceed it without pressure. If they couldn't envision my success, I was free to define it for myself. That flight represented more than geographical distance. It was the beginning of a journey toward becoming someone they could never have imagined. Someone whose strength was forged not in the warmth of their approval, but in the cold clarity of their absence. I didn't know then that their low expectations would become my greatest motivation, or that their inability to see me clearly would eventually become my most powerful advantage. But I was about to find out. The Naval Academy was a shock to my system in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not the physical demands or academic rigor. I had prepared for those. What caught me off guard was discovering that my family's dismissive treatment had actually been preparation for something far more challenging than I'd realized. While other plebes broke down under the constant scrutiny and criticism from upperclassmen, I found myself thinking, this feels familiar. The difference was that here, the harsh treatment had purpose. Every shouted command, every impossible standard, every moment of deliberate stress was designed to forge something stronger. Unlike my family's criticism, which seemed designed to keep me small, the Academy's intensity was building something I could feel growing inside me with each passing week. My roommate, Sarah Chen, came from a military family where her father was a decorated Marine colonel and her brother was already serving as an Army Ranger. During our first week, as we struggled through the brutal initiation rituals, she confided that she felt enormous pressure to live up to her family's legacy. "They expect me to excel here," she said one night as we polished our boots for the 100th time. "What if I disappoint them?" I almost laughed, not from cruelty, but from the pure irony of it. My family expects me to fail here, I told her. They think I made a mistake coming. According to them, this place isn't for girls like me. Sarah stared at me in disbelief, and I realized that having no expectations to live up to was actually liberating in ways she couldn't understand. While Sarah battled the weight of generational military honor, I was free to forge my own path without the burden of inherited reputation. Every achievement was purely my own. Every failure was a lesson I could learn from without disappointing anyone's preconceived notions. The absence of family support had inadvertently given me something more valuable: complete ownership of my journey. The academic challenges were intense, but I discovered that years of teaching myself, from guitar to debate to college applications, had developed a self reliance that served me well. While other midshipmen struggled with the independent learning required, I thrived on autonomy. I had been essentially homeschooling myself in life skills since childhood, so adapting to rigorous self directed study felt natural. Physical training revealed another unexpected advantage of my background. Growing up as the overlooked daughter had taught me to push through discomfort without seeking sympathy or support. When other students called home crying after particularly brutal PT sessions, I simply did what I'd always done: absorbed the pain quietly and kept moving forward. The emotional resilience I'd built from years of family indifference translated perfectly into military stoicism. My first semester grades placed me in the top 15% of my class, but when I called home to share the news, the response was predictably underwhelming. "That's nice, dear," my mother said absently. "Jennifer just landed a major internship with a Fortune 500 company. Did I tell you about that?" I hadn't expected enthusiasm, but the contrast still stung. Here I was excelling at one of the most demanding institutions in the country, and it rated less attention than Jennifer's summer job. That phone call marked the last time I would seek their validation for my achievements. Not out of anger, but from a growing understanding that their approval wasn't necessary for my success. In fact, their continued indifference was becoming fuel for a fire I hadn't known was burning inside me. The second semester brought leadership opportunities that revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. When upperclassmen began selecting plebes for positions of responsibility, I found myself chosen repeatedly. Not because I was the strongest or the loudest, but because I remained calm under pressure and never seemed to break under stress. What they didn't know was that I had been stress tested my entire life by a family that treated emotional neglect as normal. During a particularly challenging field exercise, our squad was tasked with navigating a complex night mission with incomplete information and constantly changing objectives. While other team members argued about strategy or became paralyzed by uncertainty, I found myself naturally taking charge, making decisions quickly and adjusting tactics as new information emerged. The commanding officer later told me that I had demonstrated exceptional composure under ambiguous circumstances. That phrase stuck with me because it perfectly described my entire childhood. Living with parents who changed their expectations without warning, managing a family dynamic where the rules were different for different children, surviving emotional terrain where approval could vanish without explanation. All of that had been training for leadership under ambiguous circumstances. My instructors began to notice patterns in my performance that distinguished me from my peers. I didn't just follow orders, I anticipated needs, identified problems before they became critical, and found solutions that others missed. During one tactical exercise, I spotted a flaw in our planned approach that could have resulted in mission failure. Instead of following the established protocol blindly, I suggested an alternative that not only worked but became a case study for future classes. The Academy's emphasis on honor, courage, and commitment resonated with something deep inside me. These weren't just military values, they were principles I had been developing in isolation, creating my own moral compass without family guidance. Years of making ethical decisions without parental input had prepared me for an institution that demanded moral clarity under pressure. By the end of my first year, I had earned recognition that went beyond good grades. My company commander recommended me for advanced leadership training, noting that I possessed natural command presence and an unusual ability to maintain unit cohesion during high stress operations. What he was really observing was the result of years spent holding myself together when everything around me felt unstable. Summer training between first and second year introduced me to specialized programs that most midshipmen never experienced. I was selected for a pilot program in advanced tactical operations, where we learned skills that bordered on what special operations units practiced. The training was classified, grueling, and designed to identify candidates for the military's most elite units. During one exercise, we were subjected to interrogation resistance training, essentially controlled psychological pressure designed to test our ability to protect sensitive information under duress. While other participants struggled with the mental games and emotional manipulation, I found the experience almost familiar. Years of maintaining emotional boundaries with my family had taught me to protect my inner self from external pressure. The instructor later pulled me aside and said something that changed my trajectory entirely. Martinez, you have an unusual tolerance for psychological stress and an ability to compartmentalize that we rarely see in someone your age. Have you ever considered special operations? I hadn't, but the question opened a door I didn't even know existed. Special operations, the elite units that operated in shadows, accomplishing missions that most people would never hear about, protecting freedoms that others took for granted. It seemed like the perfect fit for someone who had learned to be strong in silence, to achieve without recognition, to serve without requiring applause. That night, I lay in my bunk thinking about the path that was beginning to reveal itself. My family's neglect hadn't broken me. It had forged me into exactly the kind of person these elite units were seeking. Their indifference had become my strength. Their low expectations had become my freedom. Their inability to see my potential had given me the space to develop it without interference. I was beginning to understand that everything I had thought was a disadvantage, the emotional independence, the self reliance, the ability to endure without support, was actually preparation for something extraordinary. Something my family could never have imagined for the daughter they saw as unremarkable. The quiet girl they had overlooked was about to disappear entirely, replaced by someone they wouldn't recognize. The selection process for naval special warfare began during my second year at the academy, though most people had no idea what was happening. The recruiters didn't make announcements or post flyers. Instead, they observed quietly, reviewing academic records, fitness scores, psychological evaluations, and leadership assessments. When my company commander called me to his office one gray February morning, I assumed I was in trouble for something. Martinez, he said, closing the door behind me, you've been invited to attend an informational briefing about advanced career opportunities. Saturday, 0600 hours, Building C. Don't discuss this with anyone. He handed me a single sheet of paper with minimal details and dismissed me without further explanation. The briefing room contained 12 midshipmen from across all four classes, each of us wondering why we'd been selected for this mysterious gathering. The officer who addressed us was older, weathered in a way that suggested he'd seen things most people only imagined. He spoke quietly, without drama or recruitment rhetoric, explaining that we were being evaluated for programs that would push us beyond anything we'd experienced at the academy. The training will be harder than anything you've endured. He said simply, most of you will quit. Those who don't quit will discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. This is not for everyone. It's barely for anyone. He outlined the initial screening process, physical trials, psychological assessments, leadership challenges, all designed to identify candidates who could handle the unimaginable. I left that briefing knowing I would volunteer, not from bravado or romantic notions about heroism, but from a deep recognition that this was what I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. The officer's description of isolation, pressure, and demands for excellence without recognition sounded like an advanced version of my childhood. The preliminary screening took place over spring break, while other midshipmen went home to visit family or traveled to vacation destinations. I stayed at the academy for what was officially described as specialized fitness assessment. In reality, it was a week of carefully orchestrated psychological and physical stress designed to identify breaking points. They woke us at random hours, forced us to complete complex problem solving exercises while physically exhausted, subjected us to sensory deprivation, and created scenarios where success seemed impossible. Other candidates began dropping out by the third day, citing medical issues or academic concerns. By the end of the week, only 4 of the original 12 remained. What surprised the evaluators was how steady my performance remained throughout the testing. While others' capabilities fluctuated wildly under stress, mine seemed to stabilize at a consistently high level. During the debriefing, one instructor commented that I appeared to be operating within my comfort zone even under extreme duress, which struck me as hilariously accurate. Extreme duress had been my comfort zone since childhood. The psychological evaluation included questions I'd never been asked before. How do you respond to extended isolation? How do you maintain motivation without external validation? How do you handle moral ambiguity in high stakes situations? Each question seemed designed specifically for someone with my background, someone who had learned to thrive in emotional solitude and make ethical decisions without guidance. When asked about my support system, I found myself explaining that I'd learned to be self sufficient from an early age, that external approval wasn't a driving factor in my performance, and that I was comfortable operating independently for extended periods. The psychologist made notes that I couldn't read, but his expression suggested these weren't typical responses from 20-year-old candidates. Summer training between second and third year officially involved advanced maritime operations, but the reality was far more complex. We learned skills that had no civilian equivalent: underwater demolitions, close quarters combat, advanced surveillance techniques, and what they euphemistically called enhanced interrogation resistance. The training took place at facilities most military personnel never saw, with instructors whose backgrounds were classified. During one exercise, we were dropped in a remote location with minimal equipment and told to survive for 2 weeks while evading capture teams hunting us. The psychological pressure was intense. We were cold, hungry, exhausted, and constantly under threat of capture, which meant starting the exercise over from the beginning. 3 candidates were eliminated for various infractions or failures. I thrived in that environment in ways that surprised even my instructors. While others struggled with the isolation and uncertainty, I found the experience clarifying. There was something pure about having only my own capabilities to rely on, about succeeding or failing based entirely on my own decisions and skills. The external validation I'd never received from my family simply wasn't necessary when survival itself was the measure of success. The night training exercises revealed abilities I hadn't known I possessed. Moving silently through hostile terrain, gathering intelligence without detection, remaining motionless for hours while observing targets, these skills seemed to emerge naturally as if I'd been preparing for them my entire life. My instructors began assigning me increasingly complex solo missions, testing my ability to operate independently under pressure. One particularly challenging exercise required infiltrating an enemy facility to retrieve specific intelligence without being detected. The facility was actually a complex training ground with multiple layers of security, motion sensors, and highly trained personnel acting as guards. Most candidates attempted the mission in teams, but I requested permission to go alone. The solo infiltration took 6 hours of patient observation, careful movement, and split second decision making. When I emerged with the required intelligence and no alerts raised, my instructor looked at the surveillance footage and asked, "Martinez, where did you learn to move like that?" The honest answer was that I'd learned to be invisible at family dinners, to navigate hostile environments without drawing attention, to accomplish objectives while remaining unnoticed. Academic performance during this period reflected the dual nature of my life at the academy. Officially, I was still a midshipman taking standard courses in engineering, leadership, and military history. Unofficially, I was attending classified briefings about global threat assessments, studying psychological warfare tactics, and learning languages that weren't offered in the regular curriculum. My grades remained excellent, but my relationship with other midshipmen began to change. The specialized training required increasing amounts of time away from normal academy activities, absences that I couldn't explain due to security protocols. My classmates began to notice that I disappeared for weekends and returned looking exhausted but unable to discuss where I'd been. Sarah, my roommate, finally confronted me about the mysterious absences. Maya, what's going on? You're gone constantly. You can't talk about where you've been, and when you come back, you look like you've been through a war. I wanted to explain, but the security classifications made it impossible. All I could say was that I was involved in advanced training that I couldn't discuss. The secrecy created an unexpected parallel to my family relationships. Once again, I was living a reality that I couldn't share with people who were supposed to be close to me. The difference was that this secrecy served a purpose larger than myself, protecting operational security rather than simply avoiding uncomfortable conversations about my achievements. By the end of my third year, I had been officially selected for Naval Special Warfare training upon graduation. The selection came with additional security clearances, specialized medical monitoring, and what my career counselor described as career track modification for classified operations. My official academy record would show standard academic achievement and leadership development. The reality was that I was being prepared for missions that wouldn't appear in any public record. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had found my calling in a field where recognition was not only unnecessary, but potentially dangerous. While Jennifer built her public brand and accumulated visible symbols of success, I was developing expertise that could never be publicly acknowledged. The invisible daughter had found the perfect career, protecting people who would never know her name, serving a country that couldn't celebrate her achievements, excelling in ways that would never make it to family dinner conversations. It was exactly where I belonged. Graduation from the Naval Academy should have been a moment of family pride, but it unfolded with the same emotional distance that had characterized my entire educational journey. My parents attended the ceremony sitting stiffly in the crowded stadium, while thousands of other families cheered wildly for their newly commissioned officers. When my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my commission as an ensign, I heard polite applause from their general direction, the kind of restrained clapping you might give a stranger's accomplishment. Jennifer had graduated from her business program 2 months earlier with a celebration that included a catered party, professional photographs, and a weekend trip to Napa Valley. My commissioning ceremony was followed by a quiet dinner at a chain restaurant near the academy, where my father spent most of the meal checking his phone and my mother asked twice when I would be stationed somewhere normal where they could visit easily. What they didn't understand was that I wouldn't be stationed anywhere normal, ever. My orders were for Naval Special Warfare training in Coronado, California, but the specifics of what that meant were classified beyond their security clearance level. When they asked what I would be doing there, all I could say was advanced training, which they interpreted as some sort of extended orientation program for new officers. The 3 weeks between commissioning and reporting to Coronado were the last time I would spend any significant period with my family. They used the time to continue their campaign of gentle concern about my career choices, suggesting that I might want to consider transferring to a more practical military specialty after completing whatever training I was attending. Engineering or logistics would give you skills you could use in the civilian world later, my father advised over breakfast one morning. This special training thing sounds very niche. What happens when you want to get married and have a normal life? The assumption that my current path was temporary, a phase to be outgrown rather than a calling to be embraced, revealed how little they understood about the person I'd become. Basic underwater demolition/slash SEAL training began on a Monday morning in June with a formation of 180 hopeful candidates standing on the beach at Coronado. The instructors wasted no time establishing the reality of what we faced. Most of us would fail, and failure was not only acceptable but expected. Only the exceptional would make it through the 24 weeks of systematically designed physical and psychological challenges. The first week eliminated 30 candidates. They quit during beach runs, during surf torture, during endless hours of calisthenics designed to break down mental barriers as much as build physical strength. I watched strong, confident officers discover their limits and make the rational decision to return to conventional military careers that wouldn't require this level of sacrifice. What surprised me was how natural the training felt, despite its legendary difficulty. The sleep deprivation reminded me of studying for finals while working multiple jobs to pay for college. The constant criticism from instructors echoed years of family disapproval, except here the criticism was designed to make me stronger rather than smaller. The physical pain was intense but temporary, unlike the emotional pain of family indifference, which had lasted decades. Hell Week arrived in the fifth week of training, 5.5 days of continuous physical and mental stress with a total of perhaps 4 hours of sleep. Candidates were pushed beyond what they believed possible, forced to function while hallucinating from exhaustion, required to complete complex tasks while their bodies screamed for rest. The dropout rate during Hell Week was historically around 70%. I entered Hell Week with a strange sense of homecoming. The instructors promised us that we would discover who we really were when everything comfortable was stripped away, when external supports disappeared, when only our core selves remained. For someone who had been finding her core self in isolation for 24 years, this felt like validation rather than revelation. By Wednesday of Hell Week, I was one of only 43 candidates remaining from the original 180. The woman next to me during surf torture was hallucinating conversations with her mother. The man to my left was openly weeping while completing burpees in the sand. Around me, strong people were discovering their breaking points and making the choice to ring the bell that ended their dreams of joining the most elite military unit in the world. I never considered quitting, not because I was tougher than the others, but because this level of adversity finally matched my internal landscape. Years of emotional survival training had prepared me for exactly this moment, when comfort disappeared and only will remained. While others were being broken down, I was being revealed, like a sculpture emerging from stone as everything unnecessary was chipped away. The instructors noticed my consistency under extreme stress. During a particularly brutal log PT session, when we were required to carry telephone poles above our heads while running on sand, our team leader collapsed from exhaustion. Without being asked, I moved to the front of the group and began calling cadence, maintaining unit cohesion while ensuring we completed the exercise within the time limit. Later that day, Instructor Rodriguez pulled me aside during one of our brief rest periods. Martinez, most candidates are fighting to survive Hell Week. You seem to be thriving in it. What's your secret? I considered several responses before settling on the truth. I've been training for this my whole life. I just didn't know it. He studied my face for a long moment, made a note in his ever-present logbook, and walked away without further comment. The psychological evaluation that followed Hell Week revealed patterns that distinguished me from other successful candidates. Where many showed signs of stress-related adaptation, my responses indicated what the psychologist termed baseline resilience under adverse conditions. In simpler terms, extreme stress didn't change my personality, it revealed it. Advanced training phases introduced skills that existed in a classified world most people would never glimpse. We learned close quarters combat techniques developed specifically for special operations, studied enemy tactics and psychology, mastered weapons systems that weren't acknowledged publicly, and practiced insertion methods that sounded like science fiction. Each new capability felt like recovering memories rather than learning fresh skills. The underwater demolitions training took place in conditions designed to simulate the most challenging operational environments. We worked in zero visibility water, planted explosives while holding our breath for extended periods, and learned to navigate by touch and intuition when all other senses failed. During one exercise, I spent 4 hours underwater, in complete darkness, placing charges on a simulated enemy vessel while avoiding detection by sonar operators. My performance during language training surprised even the instructors. The accelerated programs were designed to create functional fluency in operationally relevant languages within months rather than years. While other candidates struggled with the pace and intensity, I absorbed new languages like someone recovering forgotten knowledge. By graduation, I was conversationally fluent in Arabic and Pashto, with working knowledge of several regional dialects. The final selection phase included psychological stress testing that went beyond anything experienced during Hell Week. We were subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques, sensory manipulation, and scenarios designed to test our ability to protect classified information under extreme duress. The training was so realistic that several candidates suffered genuine psychological trauma and required counseling. During one exercise, I was held in simulated captivity for 72 hours, subjected to sleep deprivation, temperature extremes, and psychological manipulation designed to break down my resistance. While other candidates eventually revealed training information or provided false confessions, I maintained operational security throughout the ordeal. The evaluators noted that my stress responses remained consistently controlled, as if the situation was uncomfortable but not unprecedented. When I finally graduated from SEAL training 8 months after arriving in Coronado, I was one of only 12 candidates from the original class of 180. The graduation ceremony was small, attended only by family members with appropriate security clearances and a handful of senior officers who understood the significance of what we had accomplished. My family did not attend, not because they weren't invited, but because explaining the true nature of my graduation would have required revealing information they weren't cleared to receive. Instead, I called them that evening and simply said I had completed my training successfully and would be receiving my first operational assignment soon. My mother's response was predictably focused on practicalities. "That's nice, dear. Where will you be stationed? Somewhere safe, I hope." The irony was so complete it almost made me laugh. I was about to become one of the most dangerous people on Earth, capable of operations that could change the course of international conflicts, trained to survive, and operate in conditions that would break most human beings. And my mother was hoping I'd be stationed somewhere safe. The woman they saw as their disappointing daughter had just earned the right to wear one of the most respected insignias in the military world. But they would never know, because the mission was more important than the recognition, and protecting their peace of mind was still part of my job, even if they could never appreciate the sacrifice that protection required. My first operational deployment took me to places that didn't exist on any map my family would ever see. The mission briefings happened in windowless rooms where the details were compartmentalized so thoroughly that even team members only knew their specific roles until the final planning phases. What I can say is that we spent 6 months in a region where American military presence was officially denied, conducting operations that would never appear in any public record. The work was everything my training had prepared me for and nothing my family could have imagined. We moved through hostile territory like shadows, gathering intelligence that influenced policy decisions made in Washington, neutralizing threats that could have destabilized entire regions. The scale of responsibility was staggering. Decisions I made in split seconds had consequences that rippled through international relations, though no one outside our unit would ever connect those outcomes to our actions. During one particularly complex operation, our team was tasked with retrieving an asset from a compound deep in enemy territory. The mission required infiltrating a heavily guarded facility, locating and extracting a high value target, and exfiltrating without leaving evidence of American involvement. The planning took weeks, the execution took 6 hours, and the geopolitical ramifications lasted months, though they were attributed to internal political shifts rather than foreign intervention. My role in that operation earned me recognition that existed only in classified files. The team leader's after action report noted that I had demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment under extreme pressure and leadership capabilities that exceed normal expectations for junior officers. Those words would follow me through promotion boards and assignment considerations, building a reputation in a community so small that everyone eventually knew everyone else's capabilities. The psychological toll of that first deployment was different from anything I had experienced. Not because the work was traumatic, I had been prepared for the realities of special operations, but because the complete secrecy meant I couldn't share the weight of what we had accomplished with anyone outside our team. When I called home during our brief communication windows, I had to listen to my family's concerns about my desk job while carrying the knowledge that I had just helped prevent a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands. Between deployments, I was stationed at a facility that officially didn't house special operations units. My family knew I was somewhere on the East Coast, involved in what I described as training and readiness operations. They assumed this meant I was teaching safety courses or updating equipment manuals. In reality, I was developing expertise in advanced urban warfare tactics, learning to operate cutting edge surveillance technology, and studying threat assessments that read like the plots of conspiracy thrillers. The promotion to lieutenant came faster than normal, accelerated by performance evaluations that couldn't be shared with anyone lacking appropriate clearances. When I called to tell my family about the promotion, their response was polite but underwhelmed. That's wonderful, dear, my mother said. Jennifer just became a partner at her firm. You should call and congratulate her. The contrast between their reactions to my military advancement and Jennifer's corporate success was so stark, it had moved beyond painful into the realm of dark comedy. What they didn't understand was that my promotion came with responsibilities that dwarfed anything in Jennifer's business world. I was now responsible for planning and executing operations that required coordination between multiple intelligence agencies, liaison with foreign military units, and command decisions that could expose or protect assets worth millions of dollars and countless lives. My second deployment took our team to Southeast Asia, where we spent 8 months conducting what were euphemistically called training exercises with allied forces. The reality involved hunting high-value targets through jungle terrain, establishing communication networks in areas where conventional military couldn't operate, and building relationships with local forces whose cooperation was essential for American strategic interests in the region. During that deployment, I led my first solo mission, a reconnaissance operation that required deep penetration into territory controlled by hostile forces. The mission lasted 72 hours, during which I gathered intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions that proved crucial for subsequent operations throughout the region. The success of that mission earned me a commendation that would remain classified for decades if it was ever declassified at all. The isolation of leading solo operations was profound but familiar. Moving through hostile territory with only my own skills and judgment to rely on felt like an advanced version of navigating family gatherings where emotional landmines were hidden everywhere. The hyper-awareness required to survive in enemy territory, constantly assessing threats, reading micro-expressions, anticipating danger, was remarkably similar to the survival skills I had developed as a child, trying to avoid triggering family criticism. When I returned from that second deployment, my family's questions had evolved from concern about my safety to confusion about my career trajectory. "We just don't understand what you do," my father said during one phone call. "Other military families we know can at least describe their children's jobs. You've been in for 3 years and we still have no idea what your actual work involves." The truth was that my work involved protecting people like them from threats they would never know existed. While they worried about Jennifer's stress levels managing her marketing campaigns, I was managing operations that prevented those campaigns from being interrupted by terrorist attacks. While they celebrated her business trips to European capitals, I was ensuring those capitals remained safe for American travelers. My promotion to lieutenant commander at 27 was unusually rapid, reflecting performance that stood out even within the special operations community. The promotion ceremony was held in a secure facility with only team members and senior officers present. No family members were invited because explaining the significance of the promotion would have required revealing information about my actual duties. That evening, I called home to share the news, and my mother's first response was, "Is that good?" "It sounds important, but we don't really understand military ranks." When I explained that it meant increased responsibility and recognition for exceptional performance, she seemed pleased, but quickly shifted the conversation to Jennifer's recent feature in a business magazine. The magazine article included photos and quotes about Jennifer's success philosophy. My promotion would never be mentioned in any publication that my family would ever see. The leadership responsibilities that came with lieutenant commander rank included overseeing training programs for new SEAL candidates, developing tactical innovations that would be implemented across special operations units, and serving as a liaison with intelligence agencies on operational planning. I was now regularly briefing senior Pentagon officials on threat assessments and capability requirements, contributing to strategic decisions that shaped American military policy globally. During one briefing, a Deputy Secretary of Defense asked for my assessment of enemy capabilities in a region where we had been conducting operations for months. My response influenced resource allocation decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars and operational strategies that would affect American interests for years. After the briefing, the deputy secretary commented to my commanding officer that I demonstrated strategic thinking capabilities rarely seen at the lieutenant commander level. These achievements existed in a parallel universe to my family's understanding of success. While Jennifer accumulated visible symbols of accomplishment, luxury cars, designer clothes, expensive vacations documented on social media, I was accumulating experiences that would never be shared publicly. My success was measured in lives saved, threats neutralized, and strategic objectives achieved in places that didn't officially exist. The gap between my reality and their perception had grown so wide that bridging it seemed impossible. They saw me as the family member who had chosen an unconventional path that they couldn't understand or celebrate. I saw myself as someone who had found her calling in service to something larger than personal achievement, someone whose work protected the very freedoms that allowed Jennifer to build her business empire and our parents to sleep safely in their suburban home. That gap was about to become a chasm because my next assignment would change everything in ways that neither they nor I could anticipate. The assignment to Joint Special Operations Command came with a promotion to commander and responsibilities that stretched far beyond anything I had previously experienced. At 31, I was one of the youngest officers ever selected to lead a specialized task force responsible for what the Pentagon euphemistically called high priority target acquisition and elimination. In practical terms, I was now commanding operations that required coordination between Navy SEALs, Army Delta Force, CIA operatives, and international partner forces in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth. My new position required relocation to a facility that officially didn't exist, conducting briefings with officials whose names would never appear in public records, and managing operations that influenced global security in ways that would remain classified for generations. The weight of command at this level was extraordinary. Decisions I made in classified briefing rooms affected the safety of millions of people, though they would never know my name or understand how close they had come to various catastrophes. The irony of my family's continued ignorance about my career had evolved from painful to almost surreal. During our monthly phone calls, they would ask about my government job, with the same tone they might use to inquire about a position at the Department of Motor Vehicles. When I mentioned that I had received another promotion, my father would politely congratulate me and then immediately ask if I thought Jennifer's new business venture sounded promising. My commanding officer, Admiral Richardson, was a legendary figure within the special operations community whose career spanned decades of conflicts that shaped modern military doctrine. During my first briefing as the new task force commander, he outlined responsibilities that seemed designed to test the limits of human capability. Commander Martinez, he said, reviewing my file, your psychological profile indicates exceptional resilience under isolation and pressure. You're going to need every bit of that in this position. The task force I inherited consisted of operators who represented the absolute pinnacle of military capability: SEALs, Rangers, Delta Force operators, and intelligence specialists who had proven themselves in the most challenging operational environments. Leading people at this level required credibility that could only be earned through demonstrated competence under impossible circumstances. The fact that I had been selected to command this unit at my age and rank indicated that my reputation within the community had reached levels I hadn't fully appreciated. Our first major operation under my command involved neutralizing a threat that could have destabilized an entire region and potentially triggered a larger conflict involving multiple nations. The mission required infiltrating a heavily defended compound, extracting critical intelligence, and eliminating specific targets without leaving evidence of American involvement. The planning phase alone took 6 weeks and involved coordination with assets from 12 different agencies across 7 countries. The operation itself unfolded over 4 days across multiple time zones, requiring real time command decisions based on constantly evolving intelligence. From my position in the Tactical Operations Center, I coordinated movements of teams operating simultaneously in 3 different countries, adjusted mission parameters as new threats emerged, and managed diplomatic considerations that arose when our operations intersected with local political situations. When the operation concluded successfully, the after action briefings revealed its broader significance. The intelligence we had gathered prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of civilians and triggered retaliatory strikes that might have escalated into regional warfare. The targets we had eliminated included key figures whose continued activities would have destabilized multiple governments and threatened American strategic interests for years. Admiral Richardson's debrief was characteristically direct. Commander, that operation will influence international security for the next decade. The precision of your tactical decisions and the strategic thinking you demonstrated saved lives and prevented conflicts that most people will never know were possible. He paused, studying my face. Operations at this level carry weight that extends far beyond military objectives. You've demonstrated that you understand those implications. The psychological burden of command at this level was unlike anything I had experienced as a team member. Every decision carried consequences that rippled through complex systems of international relations, intelligence networks, and human lives. The isolation was profound. I couldn't discuss the weight of these responsibilities with anyone outside the small community of people who held similar clearances and carried similar burdens. During this period, my family's perception of my career reached new depths of misunderstanding. My mother began suggesting that I consider leaving the military to pursue something more fulfilling, perhaps joining Jennifer's company where I could use my organizational skills in a more rewarding environment. The suggestion that managing marketing campaigns would be more fulfilling than protecting national security would have been hilarious if it weren't so completely detached from reality.
My second major operation as task force commander involved a crisis that developed over 48 hours and required immediate response to prevent what intelligence analysts described as a catastrophic scenario with global implications. The details remain classified at levels that will likely never be declassified, but the successful resolution required capabilities that existed nowhere else in the American military structure. The operation earned recognition from officials at the highest levels of government, though that recognition could never be made public. The President himself was briefed on the mission's outcome, and his response was relayed through multiple levels of command. The operation had prevented a crisis that could have fundamentally altered America's position in global affairs. My role in preventing that crisis earned me a commendation that would never appear in any public record, but would influence my career trajectory for years to come. Between operations, I was regularly called to brief congressional committees, Pentagon officials, and intelligence leadership on threat assessments and capability requirements. These briefings influenced budget allocations worth billions of dollars and strategic policies that shaped America's approach to emerging security challenges. The irony that my family worried about my job security while I was advising the nation's highest officials on matters of global importance had moved beyond ironic into the realm of absurd. My promotion to full commander at 32 was accompanied by assignment to an even more classified role within the special operations community. The new position involved responsibilities that stretched across multiple theaters of operation and required oversight of programs that pushed the boundaries of what was technologically and operationally possible. I was now one of perhaps 50 people in the world who understood the full scope of certain American capabilities in unconventional warfare. The selection for this role came with briefings that revealed aspects of global security that weren't acknowledged in any public forum. I learned about threats that kept senior officials awake at night, capabilities that existed in theoretical scenarios only, and strategic considerations that influenced policy decisions across multiple presidential administrations. The weight of this knowledge was extraordinary, particularly when combined with the complete inability to share any of it with people outside the small community of those who carried similar clearances. During my annual performance review, Admiral Richardson made an observation that crystallized the trajectory my career had taken. Commander Martinez, you've demonstrated capabilities that distinguish you within a community that already represents the highest levels of military achievement. Your psychological resilience, tactical judgment, and strategic thinking have proven exceptional even by our standards. You're being considered for positions that represent the absolute pinnacle of military responsibility. Those positions, he explained, came with recognition that could never be public, and responsibilities that would place me among the most influential military officers in the world, though my name would never appear in any publication or ceremony that my family would ever see. The ultimate irony was that I was approaching the highest levels of military success while remaining completely invisible to the people who had spent decades assuming I had failed to achieve anything noteworthy. The distance between their perception and my reality had become so vast that it felt like we were living in different universes entirely. They inhabited a world where success was measured in visible achievements and public recognition. I inhabited a world where the most important achievements were necessarily invisible, and the most significant recognition came from people whose own work could never be acknowledged publicly. That distance was about to be bridged in a way none of us could anticipate, when their world and mine would collide at Jennifer's upcoming military ceremony in ways that would change everything forever. Jennifer's invitation to her company's military appreciation event arrived with characteristic fanfare, presented as a major corporate initiative that would demonstrate her firm's patriotic values while providing excellent networking opportunities. The event was being held at a prestigious venue near the Pentagon, with what she described as high-ranking military officials attending to receive the company's newly established annual awards for excellence in defense contracting support. "Maya, you absolutely have to come," she insisted during our phone call, her voice carrying that familiar tone of excitement mixed with self-importance. "It's going to be such an important event for my career, and having actual military family there would mean so much. Plus, you can finally meet some real military leaders and see what serious defense work looks like." The casual dismissal of my own military service, combined with her assumption that I'd never encountered real military leaders, was so perfectly Jennifer that I almost laughed. My parents were equally enthusiastic about the event, though for different reasons. "It will be wonderful for you to see what Jennifer has accomplished in the defense sector," my mother said. "Maybe you'll get some ideas about how to advance your own career by working with military contractors instead of just being in the military." The suggestion that working with the military was somehow superior to actually serving in it revealed depths of misunderstanding that I had stopped trying to correct years ago. What none of them knew was that Jennifer's company had been providing support services for operations I had been commanding for the past 18 months. The high-ranking military officials attending her event included several officers whose careers had intersected with mine in various classified contexts. Most significantly, the keynote speaker was Admiral Richardson, my commanding officer, who had specifically requested my attendance when he learned about my family connection to the hosting company. This is an interesting development, Commander, Admiral Richardson had said during our briefing about the event. Your sister's company has been providing logistics support for several of our operations. Though she obviously has no knowledge of the classified aspects of that work, this event provides an opportunity to observe civilian-contractor relationships from a different perspective. What he didn't say, but what we both understood, was that it also provided an opportunity for my family to finally glimpse the reality of my career. The week before the event, I found myself in the unusual position of preparing for a social gathering that would require managing multiple layers of classification and personal relationships simultaneously. I would be attending as Jennifer's sister while also being present as a senior military officer whose actual role in the operations her company supported could never be revealed. The cognitive dissonance was extraordinary. Jennifer's excitement about introducing me to important military people reached new heights as the event approached. I've arranged for you to sit at a table with some really impressive officers, she told me proudly. There's going to be an admiral there who's apparently very important in special operations. You'll love meeting him. He's the kind of military leader you should aspire to work with someday. The idea that I should aspire to work with my own commanding officer was so perfectly absurd that I had to put the phone on mute to compose myself. My parents planned their attendance with the same meticulous attention they brought to all of Jennifer's important events. They arranged for new formal wear, researched the venue's history, and prepared conversation topics that would allow them to discuss Jennifer's achievements with the distinguished guests. The contrast with their preparation for my own military ceremonies, which they had never attended, was stark but no longer surprising. The morning of the event, I received a classified briefing about security protocols and communication procedures that would be in effect during the gathering. Several of the guests would actually be intelligence officers conducting assessment meetings under civilian cover, and multiple ongoing operations required coordination that would happen through seemingly casual conversations during the cocktail reception. I would be simultaneously attending my sister's corporate celebration and participating in national security operations. Getting dressed for the event required careful consideration of multiple factors beyond normal formal wear selection. I needed to present as Jennifer's civilian sister, while also maintaining the bearing appropriate for a commander in the presence of senior officers who knew my actual rank and responsibilities. The solution was a simple but elegant dress that could serve either role without drawing attention to the contradiction. The venue was exactly what Jennifer had promised, an upscale hotel ballroom filled with corporate executives, military officers, and defense contractors networking over cocktails and dinner. The guest list included several people I had worked with in various classified capacities, though we would be meeting tonight as strangers, making polite conversation about Jennifer's company and its contributions to national defense.
Jennifer immediately took charge of my introduction to the gathering, proudly presenting me to various colleagues and clients as her sister, who works for the government in some kind of military support role. Each introduction was accompanied by gentle explanations of my career limitations and suggestions that I could learn valuable lessons from the successful people she was introducing me to. The irony reached peak levels when she introduced me to Colonel Stevens, who had been part of the joint task force I had commanded during our operation in Southeast Asia 6 months earlier. This is my sister Maya, who does some kind of administrative work for the military, Jennifer explained proudly. Maybe you could give her some advice about advancing in defense work. Colonel Stevens's expression was carefully neutral as he shook my hand, though I caught the slight pause that indicated his recognition of the situation's absurdity. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said formally, playing his role perfectly. Your sister speaks very highly of your company's support for military operations. The conversation that followed was a masterpiece of double meaning as we discussed administrative challenges in military logistics, while actually conducting a preliminary debrief on operational outcomes that remained classified at the highest levels. My parents circulated through the reception with obvious pride, discussing Jennifer's achievements with anyone who would listen. I watched them describe her business success to military officers who had no idea they were speaking to parents who had consistently dismissed and ignored their other daughter's career in the same military those officers served. The cognitive dissonance was visible on several faces as officers tried to reconcile my parents' obvious pride in Jennifer with their casual dismissal of my own military service. The moment I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire adult life arrived when Admiral Richardson took the podium to deliver the keynote address. His speech began with standard remarks about civilian military cooperation and the importance of contractor support for defense operations. But as he continued, his focus shifted to something more specific and more personal. Tonight, I want to recognize not just the contractors who support our mission, but the military professionals whose dedication makes that mission possible, he said, his eyes scanning the audience until they found mine. Excellence in special operations requires leaders who can operate under impossible circumstances, make critical decisions without recognition, and accomplish objectives that can never be publicly acknowledged. The room was listening politely, assuming this was typical military rhetoric about unnamed heroes and classified operations. My family was nodding along, probably thinking about how nice it would be if I could someday work with people of this caliber. They had no idea that everything was about to change. This evening, I have the honor of being in the presence of one of the most exceptional officers I have had the privilege to command, Admiral Richardson continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Someone whose tactical brilliance and strategic thinking have influenced operations that will remain classified for decades, but whose impact on global security has been extraordinary. The audience was now paying closer attention, sensing that this was building toward something more significant than general praise. Jennifer was beaming, probably assuming that one of her important clients was about to be recognized. My parents were listening with polite interest, still unaware that their world was about to shift fundamentally. Admiral Richardson's next words would change everything. Commander Martinez, would you please stand so that this audience can properly acknowledge your service to our nation? The silence that followed Admiral Richardson's words was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a respectful audience or the brief pause before applause. It was the stunned, airless silence of a room full of people whose understanding of reality had just been fundamentally altered. Every face in the ballroom turned toward me, and I could see the precise moment when recognition hit different groups of people in waves. The military officers in attendance understood immediately. They had heard Admiral Richardson speak before and knew the weight he gave to words like exceptional and extraordinary. When he called someone commander, particularly in the context of special operations, it carried implications that made seasoned veterans straighten unconsciously in their chairs. I could see several officers quickly reassessing everything they thought they knew about Jennifer's administrative sister. The corporate executives and defense contractors took longer to process what they were hearing. Commander wasn't just a title. It represented years of proven leadership, operational success, and responsibilities that most of them could only imagine. The woman they had been politely ignoring as Jennifer's underachieving relative was suddenly revealed as someone whose military rank outranked most of the officers in the room. But it was my family's reaction that created the most profound shift in the atmosphere. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching shock as he tried to reconcile the Admiral's words with everything he thought he knew about my career. My mother's expression was frozen somewhere between pride and bewilderment, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't seem to fit together. Jennifer's reaction was the most complex. She had spent the evening introducing me as her sister who needed career guidance, explaining to successful people how they might help me find better opportunities in defense work. Now she was discovering that I outranked many of the military officers she had been proudly networking with, that my government job involved responsibilities she had never imagined, that the sister she had been trying to help was actually more accomplished in her field than Jennifer was in hers. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Admiral Richardson's acknowledgement had created a moment that years of careful operational security had been designed to prevent. The invisible woman was suddenly visible, the underestimated daughter was being recognized at the highest levels, and the family disappointment was being revealed as their greatest success story. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Richardson continued, Commander Martinez has led special operations that have prevented terrorist attacks, neutralized threats to American interests, and contributed to global security in ways that will remain classified for decades. Her tactical innovations have been adopted across multiple special operations units, and her leadership under impossible circumstances has earned the respect of everyone who has had the privilege to serve with her. The applause that followed was different from typical formal recognition. The military officers in the room were clapping with the intensity reserved for someone they recognized as genuinely exceptional. The defense contractors were applauding someone whose work they supported but had never met. My family was clapping mechanically, still processing the revelation that everything they thought they knew about my life had been wrong. As I remained standing, acknowledging the recognition with the bearing I had developed through years of command responsibility, I could see my parents, trying to reconcile this moment with decades of assumptions. The daughter they had worried about, the sister they had tried to help, the family member they had seen as directionless was being honored by an admiral whose introduction made clear that I was among the most accomplished military officers in the room. Colonel Stevens, who had been introduced to me earlier as Jennifer's administrative sister, now approached with the formal bearing appropriate for addressing a superior officer. Commander Martinez, it's an honor to have the opportunity to express my appreciation for your leadership on Operation Meridian, he said, using code words that indicated our previous collaboration while maintaining operational security. Your tactical decisions during that deployment were instrumental in our success. The conversation that followed was conducted in the careful language of classified operations, but its implications were clear to everyone listening. This wasn't polite recognition for administrative support or general military service. This was acknowledgement of operational leadership at the highest levels, the kind of responsibilities that shaped international events and protected American interests in ways that rarely became public knowledge. Jennifer stood nearby, listening to military officers discuss my strategic thinking and operational innovations with the kind of reverence she was accustomed to receiving for her own business achievements. I could see her struggling to process the realization that while she had been building a successful marketing company, I had been commanding operations that influenced global security. My parents approached hesitantly, their faces showing the emotional complexity of discovering that their assumptions about their own daughter had been so completely wrong. Maya, my father said carefully, we had no idea that your work was so significant. The word hung in the air, weighted with years of dismissed achievements and casual dismissals of my career choices. We're very proud of you, my mother added, though her voice carried undertones of confusion and what might have been regret. For the first time, they were seeing me not through the lens of their own limited understanding of success, but through the eyes of people who understood the true nature of what I had accomplished. The remainder of the evening unfolded with a surreal quality that highlighted the profound disconnect between perception and reality that had defined my relationship with my family for decades. Military officers who had worked with me in various capacities approached to express appreciation for my leadership, while my family stood nearby trying to understand how the daughter they had seen as unsuccessful could be receiving recognition at this level. Jennifer's colleagues and clients, who had listened politely all evening to her stories about helping her underachieving sister, now found themselves reassessing everything they had heard. The woman they had been told needed career guidance was actually more accomplished in her field than most people in the room. including some who had been offering advice about military contractor opportunities. During dinner, Admiral Richardson shared carefully selected stories about my operational achievements, each one revealing another layer of responsibility and accomplishment that my family had never suspected. They learned that I had commanded multinational task forces, that my tactical innovations were being studied at military academies, that operations I had led were considered case studies in special operations excellence. The cognitive dissonance was visible on my family's faces throughout the meal. They were proud, certainly, but also dealing with the realization that their understanding of my life had been so incomplete as to be essentially fictional. The daughter they had worried about was actually more successful than they had ever imagined possible. The sister they had tried to help was already operating at levels of achievement they couldn't have conceived. As the evening concluded, my family's attempts to process what they had learned created moments of almost painful awkwardness. Jennifer, who had spent years offering career advice and expressing concern about my future, now found herself trying to congratulate someone whose accomplishments made her own business success seem modest by comparison. My parents, who had spent decades assuming I needed their guidance and support, discovered that I had been protecting national security while they worried about my job prospects. The roles had been completely reversed. I wasn't the family member who needed help finding direction. I was the one whose work protected the freedoms that allowed them to pursue their own ambitions safely. The drive home that night was conducted in silence, each of us processing the implications of what had been revealed. For my family, it was the discovery that everything they thought they knew about my life had been wrong. For me, it was the strange experience of finally being seen by the people whose recognition I had stopped seeking years ago. The invisible daughter was visible at last, but the revelation had come too late to change the fundamental dynamics that had shaped our relationships for decades. The weeks following Jennifer's event passed with an awkwardness that permeated every interaction with my family. Phone calls that had once been predictably dismissive now carried undertones of uncertainty, as if they were speaking to someone they had just met rather than a daughter and sister they had known for 32 years. The comfortable dynamics of their concern for my future and gentle suggestions for improvement had been shattered, leaving behind a vacuum that none of us seemed to know how to fill. My mother called 3 days after the ceremony, her voice carrying a careful formality that hadn't been there before. Maya, your father and I have been thinking about what we learned the other night, she began, pausing as if searching for the right words. We realize we haven't been very aware of what your work actually involves. We're very proud of you, and we're sorry if we haven't shown that properly. The apology was genuine, but came with the weight of decades of missed opportunities, making it feel both meaningful and insufficient. Jennifer's response was more complex, reflecting the particular challenge of discovering that the sister she had been trying to help was actually more accomplished than she was. Her first call came a week after the event, and the conversation revealed someone struggling to reconcile years of assumptions with a new reality that didn't fit her understanding of our family dynamics. Maya, I feel like I owe you an apology, she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. All those times I offered you career advice, all those suggestions about finding better opportunities, I had no idea that you were already doing something so important. I feel like an idiot for treating you like you needed my help when you were already more successful than I realized was even possible. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had, marked by Jennifer's genuine attempt to understand a world she had never known existed. She asked questions about my training, my responsibilities, and the nature of special operations work, though I could only provide general answers due to security classifications. For the first time in our adult lives, she was seeking to understand my perspective, rather than offering her own advice. What surprised me most was discovering that I no longer felt the satisfaction I had expected from their recognition. Years of seeking their approval had been replaced by a self-worth that didn't require external validation, and their belated acknowledgement felt more like closure than triumph. I was genuinely happy that they finally understood what I had accomplished, but their recognition didn't change the fundamental fact that I had learned to thrive without it. My father's response revealed the depth of his struggle with the revelation. During one conversation, he admitted that he had spent years worrying about my future, genuinely believing that I lacked the ambition and capability that Jennifer had demonstrated. I thought you were just drifting, he said quietly. I couldn't understand why you seemed content with what I assumed was mediocrity. Now I realize that you were protecting us from worry by not explaining what you were actually doing. His insight was more accurate than he knew. I had indeed been protecting them, not just from operational security requirements, but from the psychological burden of knowing that their daughter regularly put herself in mortal danger to protect people like them. Their ignorance of my actual work had been a gift I had given them, allowing them to sleep peacefully while I carried responsibilities that would have terrified them. The family dynamics that followed the revelation were characterized by a reversal of roles that felt strange for everyone involved. Instead of offering advice about my career prospects, they began asking tentative questions about whether my work was dangerous, whether I was happy with my choices, whether there was anything they could do to support me. The shift from dismissal to concern was well intentioned, but highlighted how little they actually knew about who I had become. During one particularly honest conversation, my mother revealed the extent of her previous misunderstanding. We used to worry that you weren't ambitious enough, that you were settling for less than you were capable of, and she said, now we're realizing that you were actually more ambitious than we could have imagined, just in ways we didn't understand. You were working towards something we couldn't even see. Her observation captured something essential about the journey I'd taken. While they had been measuring success through visible achievements and public recognition, I had been pursuing excellence in a field where the highest accomplishments were necessarily invisible. Our definitions of ambition and achievement had been so different that we might as well have been speaking different languages. The recognition I received from my family came with an unexpected side effect. It forced me to reflect on the person I had become during the years of building my career in isolation from their understanding. The woman who had been revealed at Jennifer's event was someone I had developed largely in response to their indifference, someone whose strength had been forged in the absence of their support. I realized that their early dismissal of my potential had given me something valuable: complete freedom to become whoever I was capable of being without the pressure of their expectations. If they had believed in my potential from the beginning, I might have felt obligated to pursue achievements that would validate their faith in me. Instead, I had been free to find my own path, to develop capabilities that exceeded even my own initial understanding of what was possible. The irony was that their failure to see my potential had allowed me to exceed it in ways that wouldn't have been possible if I had been seeking their approval. Every operation I had commanded, every innovation I had developed, every moment of leadership under impossible circumstances had been motivated by internal standards rather than external validation. Their recognition now felt like acknowledgement of someone they had accidentally helped create through their absence of support. As months passed, our relationship settled into a new pattern that was more honest but also more distant. They no longer offered career advice or expressed concern about my future, but they also seemed uncertain about how to relate to someone whose work they couldn't fully understand or discuss. The easy familiarity of their previous dismissal had been replaced by a respectful distance that acknowledged my accomplishments while highlighting the gap between our worlds. Jennifer's business continued to thrive, and she still shared her successes with the family, but the context had changed fundamentally. Her achievements in the corporate world were no longer presented as the family's primary source of pride or as an example for me to follow. Instead, they were simply her own accomplishments, worthy of celebration, but no longer carrying the weight of comparison with my supposed failure. My parents began including both Jennifer and me in their conversations about family success, though their understanding of my achievements remained necessarily limited by security classifications. They were proud of having two successful daughters, but they could never fully appreciate the nature of what I had accomplished because the details would remain classified for decades if they were ever declassified at all. The ultimate irony was that their recognition, which I had unconsciously sought for so many years, came at a point when I no longer needed it. I had found peace in the work itself, in the knowledge that I was protecting people like them from threats they would never know existed. Their approval was meaningful but not essential. a nice addition to a sense of purpose that had been built on much stronger foundations. I had become someone they could finally be proud of, but more importantly, I had become someone I was proud of. The silent strength that had carried me through years of family indifference had evolved into something that didn't require recognition to validate its worth. I had learned to measure success, not in applause, but in missions accomplished, not in public recognition, but in lives protected, not in family approval, but in service to something larger than any individual achievement. The woman they had underestimated had indeed shown them who she really was, but the revelation had come too late to change the fundamental truth. I had already become exactly who I was meant to be, with or without their understanding. And that realization was perhaps the greatest victory of all. 2 years have passed since that evening when everything changed. My family and I have found a new equilibrium, one built on mutual respect rather than misunderstanding. They've stopped offering career advice, and I've stopped needing their validation. We love each other more honestly now, without the weight of unmet expectations on either side. Last month, I received orders for my next assignment, a position that will likely lead to admiral rank within 5 years. When I shared the news, my father's response was simply, "We're proud of you, Maya. We always should have been." Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones that acknowledge what should have been said years ago. Jennifer's company continues to support military operations, though she now understands that some of the logistics coordination they provide serves missions she'll never know about. We've grown closer in ways I never expected, bonded by her newfound respect for a world she can glimpse but never fully enter. The quiet strength that carried me through years of being overlooked has become the foundation for everything I've built since. I learned that true success isn't measured in recognition or approval, but in the knowledge that your work matters, that your sacrifices protect others, and that you've become exactly who you were meant to be. Sometimes the greatest victories happen in silence, witnessed only by those who understand their true value. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. We all have moments when we're underestimated, when our true worth goes unrecognized. But remember, your value isn't determined by others' ability to see it. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of quiet strength and want more stories about overcoming family expectations. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't measured by others' understanding. What's your story of being underestimated? Drop it in the comments below. Until next time, keep building in silence. Your moment of recognition will come when it matters most.